Join us right now to talk about so many different issues, the potential of Harris's economy versus a second chapter of Trump's economy. Former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy is here, co-founder of Strive Asset Management, author of Woke Inc. and the forthcoming book, Truths, The Future of America First. He's a surrogate for the Trump campaign. Good morning.
Good to see you.
It's nice to see you. So we're all waiting to hear what the Harris economy is supposed to look like. We don't know yet. I imagine we're going to hear more about that in the coming days, if not maybe at the convention itself. But I'm curious what you thought of both the president's view of the Federal Reserve rate issue in terms of his influence on that, and then her critique of that over the weekend.
Yeah, sure. On the Federal Reserve issue, just briefly, the idea that the U.S. president hasn't used the bully pulpit to influence the Federal Reserve, we all know, is a bit of a myth. So it's only a question of, do you want to do it through the front door or the back door? My view on the Federal Reserve, and I do think this is a strong message for Republicans, is the Fed needs to be more constrained in its scope to focus on dollar stability. But I want to go back to Kamala Harris's economic policies. The idea that we don't know what her economic vision is, I think, is actually a little bit off the mark in the sense that we do know what she stood for in the U.S. Senate and as vice president, as a former presidential candidate. So I do think we have a lot to go on there to talk about. Here's the question, though.
If she pivots, right? And that's what we keep hearing is she's going to pivot. You're going to see this sort of maybe turn to the center. Maybe, by the way, we're totally wrong, and it's like a complete, lefty thing. I don't think that's going to be the case. But then I imagine if she does that, then I imagine you're going to say, as others will, and we talked to Kevin McCarthy, that then she's a flip-flopper. And so what are we supposed to either believe or care about? Well,
let's look at the whispers that you're hearing now. Now, supposedly, she's opposed to a ban on fracking. That's about as ridiculous as saying that Donald Trump is opposed to a border wall. Okay, the idea that this is a person who said, it was her words, not mine, that she is absolutely in favor of ending fracking, so much so that as AG in the state of California, she actually sued the Obama administration for granting fracking permits. So you talk about ending fracking. Let's talk about the unrealized tax, the tax on unrealized capital gains. This is a formula for a stock market crash, and I think a second Great Depression.
But what I'm saying is, if she
goes, these are specific policies she has adopted.
But if she goes the other way, are we supposed to believe her? Are we not? At the same time, by the way, that people look at some of the comments that J.D. Vance made, by the way, about former President Trump, calling him America's Hitler and all sorts of things, said how much he hated him. And now, of course, is his vice president saying that he's changed his mind and he's grown and he's learned. Is it possible that she might?
So, look, I think that we'd have to evaluate what she says on the merits and how substantive her alternative proposals are. But I give the presumption of weight to what she's actually supported, what she's done. It's one thing to say someone has said this in the past, they do this today. Let's look at what she's actually done. She didn't just support the Green New Deal, Andrew. She actually co-sponsored legislation to advance it, so much so that she said she would favor ending the filibuster in the Senate to ram that through. What's in that Green New Deal? Replacing aviation travel with rail travel. Net zero by as early as 2030. In that bill, as well as others, she co-sponsored legislation with Bernie Sanders for nationalizing the U.S. healthcare system. So I think actions speak louder than words.
All of that
regardless of her words, I'll look to her actions.
Fair enough, but I think a lot of us, or a lot of voters, sense that was then, this is now, and there's a pragmatism, which brings me to the point on crypto that I think is kind of interesting. Pragmatically speaking, you'd think, why not be for it, right? This is so, and you look at what Gary Gensler is doing, going after the industry kind of time and again, and there are those who argue, who think if you're a single voter on crypto, that this could lose her the election if she doesn't come out and embrace it. Look, Trump was all for the not taxing tips, now she's all for. Do you think she will ultimately embrace crypto as an industry?
I predict her verbiage will. And I do think that part of the reason why is you see Trump's speech at the Bitcoin conference. It's just a matter of competing for votes that she's going to adopt a thoughtful position. Now, speaking as an American, not from a partisan perspective, I think that's a good thing. I think we should want great debate in the marketplace of ideas. Even if she offers a thoughtful digital assets framework or policy, even if I don't agree with all of it, I think that'll be a good thing for the country. But what I challenge Kamala Harris to do is not just cite the pieties in the words. Go into detail. Say what you actually believe about self-custody of assets. Say what you actually believe about whether you think Gary Gensler should continue as the leader of the SEC. So I think those specifics are going to matter a lot, Kelly.
For sure, but is what you're saying is just a general position of openness is probably all the industry really is looking for. This idea that it's not a partisan issue, that Republicans are for it and Democrats are against it.
It should not be a partisan issue. Now, what I think you are seeing is this tendency to really embrace whatever wins her the most votes. But when you're looking at your question, Andrew, of how do you assess the seriousness of that, the metric to use is how specific she actually gets on those policy proposals. It's one thing to say I favor private health insurance now.
Right.
Well, then the question to ask is, why were you on the Democratic debate stage when they asked the question, would you favor abolishing, that was their words, abolishing private health insurance?
Right. And she said
why
yes.
don't you put your hand up? You then raise the bar for the specifics you have to offer for exactly what policy vision you have and why you changed your mind.
But she is now the vice president of the current administration. Therefore, you would assume some continuity with whatever was happening currently. And I think the other piece of it is whatever positions in an ideal world she may have had at one point, we have this practical matter of what could actually possibly happen. What's genuinely in play, given what Congress is likely to look at, like next year, in terms of where the
tax
swing
policy
is.
Yeah, tax policy is actually the big one, Andrew. I agree with you totally. And the one I'm really worried about, and this is a group that will appreciate this well, is that tax on unrealized capital gains. This has been in the undercurrent of Democratic policy for a long time.
There's no way. You think they're going to...
Biden and Harris has put this in their budget plans for the last several years, even increasing the number for it.
In their plans?
Well, the reality, these are people who are running the country, supposedly, right? The president and the vice president of the United States. And so I do think this is a real formula for a market crash, but it's also something that beyond the stock market.
But we've never even seen the market sell off on that plan. So if they,
the
really
reality is we also have seen polls until very recently that have favored Donald Trump as the unambiguous next president of the United States. So as this gets impounded into the actual possibilities for the market, I think this is going to be an issue not just for the stock
you
market.
Might see private equity stocks sell off, but I'm not sure Pepsi and Coca-Cola and, you know.
I actually disagree with that, Kelly, especially in the tech sector. You have people sitting on large, long-standing embedded capital gains. And so for people to understand what this means, it means you have to pay taxes on sales that you have not yet made. And even forget the stock market and think about even everyday Americans across this country. That means that if you're a farmer or if you're a small business owner, you will owe taxes with cash you literally do not have in your pocket to pay those taxes. That is a formula for a second Great Depression.